Yay, I'm going to go on a multi-doctor adventure with my previous selves. All 7 of them. There's the first me. The second me. Oh my giddy aunt. The third me. I reversed the polarity of the neutron flow. The fourth me. Would you like a jelly baby? The fifth me. Cricket. The sixth me. And the seventh me. Shh. Being a mystery over here. So what do you guys think about this multi-doctor adventure? Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Alonzi, molto bene. Geronimo! Okay, are we just going to have catchphrases and things doctors say in this sketch, or are we actually going to have actual dialogue from anybody besides myself? No? Fellas behind me? Well, I'm very disappointed in all of you. By the way, where are the other 2? And also that war one. Oh, I see. They're on holiday, are they? What about the fugitive one? Her too? Alright, it's just us, guys. Well, it's just, the 11 of us? Oh, you're gonna be kidding me. Okay, it's just us, then. The 8 Doctors. Roll titles. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Nick here and welcome to a very special video for McGann Month. Today I will be taking a look at the first of the 8th Doctor novels, The 8 Doctors. Well, depends whether you count the TV movie novelisation as his first novel or not. So, The 8 Doctors, this is the first novel to feature the 8th Doctor in the BBC Doctor Who Adventures book range that started out in 1997. So a little bit of context to this series. Between 1990 and 1997, Virgin had a successful range of Doctor Who novels known as the Virgin New Adventures, mostly featuring the 7th Doctor, who was the incumbent incarnation of the time. However, around the time of the TV movie's broadcast in 1996 and the arrival of the new 8th Doctor, played by Paul McGann, Virgin's eventually lost the rights to carry on making Doctor Who stories, or their contract ran out and it wasn't renewed. So the BBC themselves decided to publish brand new Doctor Who adventures as part of a new range called the BBC Doctor Who New Adventures books, I believe that's the title. And like Virgin, this would feature all of the Doctors, but like how Virgin gave the 7th Doctor a whole bunch of new adventures during what was technically his tenure, the BBC did the same for the 8th Doctor with his own range of books, and before Big Finish came along, this was the 8th Doctor's tenure. And like with Big Finish's monthly range, what better way to start off this new range of books by having a multi-Doctor story? But a multi-Doctor story that focuses on the 8th Doctor, as it's also his first novel, and kind of setting the groundwork for his tenure as we go along in the book series. So without going into plot details, I'll basically list what this story has to do to get started the range. So first of all, it's got to tie in with the TV movie, both with events before and after the story. So you've got some events towards the end of the book that are set before the TV movie, and you've got some events at the start of the book that are set just afterwards. So it's got to tie in with the TV movie. It's got to start off the 8th Doctor's tenure in the book series. It's got to have the 8th Doctor visit his past 7 incarnations. We've got to be introduced to a new companion, Sam Jones, who'll be joining the 8th Doctor in these stories. And Terrance Dicks also wants to play around with lots of Time Lord stuff and Gallifreyan stuff, etc., whilst also revisiting a couple of past stories, some of which the events take place during those stories. Others have epilogues that follow on from those stories where the 8th Doctor seems to be jumping in to meet his other selves during those bits. So there's a lot of this book to do, and I don't think everybody gets an equal amount. The plot of this book sees the 8th Doctor foiling foil to a trap set by the Master in the TARDIS following the events of the TV movie. Because of this, the Doctor has amnesia, which is going to become a common thing with the 8th Doctor and his expanded media stories, because the TV movie did it, and that's all that everybody had to go on. 8th Doctor's thing is to give him amnesia for half his tenure in books and audios. Yay. Honestly, no wonder he becomes the War Doctor if his head's been bashed around by all the amnesia over his tenure. So, because the Doctor has some amnesia, Rassilon decides to help him regain his memories and has him revisit I'm Foreman's scrapyard in London in Shoreditch 1997, and then go off to meet his other selves at points during their lives where he can get his memories back. When he meets each incarnation, he'll get the memories of their that they have up to that point, as well as a few little other bits, either of their incarnations or building up to his more about himself as a whole. And once he meets the Seventh Doctor, he gets all his memories back. Meanwhile, the Time Lords notice that the Doctor is doing this, and they are a bit curious to what's going on and how he's even doing this in the first place, etc., and what's going on. And there's a little bit of political intrigue, but that's tame compared to what comes later. The first two chapters mainly focus on the Eighth Doctor in Shoreditch, as he meets Sam Jones, who will become his companion at the very end when he goes back to save her from a gang of drug dealers who he technically also intervenes in them attempting to hurt her in chapter 1 as well as the final chapter at the very end. To be honest, chapters 1 and 2 are my least favourite part of this book because it's more focused on introducing the Doctor and companion as opposed to going on with the story. I honestly felt like this could actually have taken place at the end of the novel or save it for the next one. Just have the Eight Doctors be an introduction to the Eighth Doctor, or after he's gone to visit the Seventh Doctor, his first adventure is to go back to Shoreditch, and he meets this girl who agrees to travel with him. I can understand why they did chapter 1 and 2 like this, because they wanted to have the Iron Foreman stuff, and then they wanted to introduce the new companion there. In all honesty, I wouldn't mind it so much if it wasn't for the fact that it has barely anything to do with the plot. Maybe if it was just one chapter, then maybe it would have made a bit more sense. If it was just one chapter focusing on the Doctor arriving at the scrapyard and saving this girl from a gang of drug dealers, and maybe not taking her with him so much, but definitely saving her and then maybe coming back later to help her out further. But we just get a bit of a diversion at the start, and the plot hasn't even started yet. Thankfully, things start to pick up when we get to chapter 3, and the Doctor actually gets to meet his first incarnation during the events of an unearthly child, where he's eventually able to persuade the first Doctor to not kill one of the cavemen. He then visits the second Doctor during the events of the War Games, and it's actually quite interesting to see the Eighth Doctor's perspective on some of these war games as they're happening, as he meets a Roman army, which might be the Ninth Legion. I'm not sure. They all get sent back home after the events of this story, so maybe it's not the Ninth Legion as we see in Eaters of Light. These meetings with the first two Doctors are during the events of those stories, An Earthly Child and the War Games. However, when we get to the third Doctor, this is the first time that we are in an epilogue to a television story. This is also when the novel also focuses on those past Doctors having those epilogue adventures after the events of the main stories. With the third Doctor, we have a couple of chapters set after the Sea Devils, where the Master escapes and returns to Devil's End, and reclaims his TARDIS, and we're focused on the third Doctor, Joe, and Captain Hart from the Sea Devils trying to locate the Master. And there's some pretty good bits here. This is probably my favourite of the epilogue to a past Doctor Who story stuff, to be honest. It's quite a fun follow-up to the Sea Devils. The final of these chapters sees the third Doctor meeting the Eighth Doctor, and them both confronting the Master, who then tries to assassinate the third Doctor, but the Eighth Doctor is able to help the third Doctor stop the Master, and eventually gets the Master's tissue compressor eliminator, which is important for later when he meets another incarnation. It's around this time the Time Lords start to notice what's going on, and whilst President Flavia, who's Chancellor Flavia from the Five Doctors, in her second term as presidency, I say second term, she was originally president after the Doctor ran away after the Five Doctors. Then she was deposed, as we'll find out later, and then she comes back to being the president. And she just wants to observe what the Doctor's going on. She doesn't really want to cause much trouble just because she knows the Doctor. However, there's this one Time Lord called Royf who really doesn't like the Doctor. He was a follower of Goth from the Deadly Assassin, and he's in league with the Celestial Intervention Agency, who, following the events of the trial of the Time Lord, have become criminals. We then see the Eighth Doctor venture into East Space for a story that takes place just after State of Decay, and sees the Fourth Doctor and Romana realise that there's still a couple of alien vampires still in East Space, and the Eighth Doctor has to help Romana to prevent the vampires from using the Doctor as their new king, with Romana as his new queen. In all honesty, I think Terrance Dicks is slightly self-indulging himself with some of these stories, because War Games, he co-wrote that one, Sea Devils, he was the script editor too, and this story, State of Decay, as well as the next one, The Five Doctors, were ones he wrote, and then Trial of the Time Lord, he's just trying to fix all the supposed wrongs fans felt about that story, wrapping that all up and trying to tie it in and make it look a bit more sense. The Eighth Doctor travels to see the Fifth Doctor. However, Roy has started sending monsters and creatures to attack the Doctor. First the Raston warrior robot, then the Sontarans, and finally Drashigs. The Eighth Doctor arrives and is able to help the Fifth Doctor defeat the Raston warrior robot, and then they were able to use the Raston warrior robot to trick the Sontarans and eventually get rid of their battle squad. And then the two of them build a machine that's able to send the Drashigs back to where they were originally sent from. Not from where they came from, but back to whoever was sending them. So Roy is eaten by a Drashig. Yay! Anyway, after the stuff with the Fifth Doctor, the majority of the rest of the book focuses on the trial of a Time Lord and the consequences of that story, as the Eighth Doctor is able to prevent an alternative timeline created by the Valiard where the Sixth Doctor is executed, and they go off to Gallifrey to make a case against the Sixth Doctor's trial, and they put basically the president in an inquiry, President Nerok, who's basically a puppet for the Celestial Intervention Agency, and they're able to out the agency's plan about Ravolox, as well as trying to put the Sixth Doctor on trial, making him look like the scapegoat for past crimes. The Sixth Doctor is eventually reunited in his proper timeline, and his events carry on as per usual, as we see at the end of the Trial of a Time Lord, whilst the Eighth Doctor has to try and sort out political stuff on Gallifrey. This is the bulk of the second half of the book, which is mostly post-Trial of a Time Lord and Gallifrey political stuff, and it's honestly only just there just to wrap up the Trial of a Time Lord stuff. Seriously, you could have the Sixth Doctor meeting the Eighth Doctor point at any point in the Sixth Doctor's life, and it wouldn't change much. But the only real reason it's here is so that Barusa can come back and save the day and redeem himself after the Five Doctors. Which, to be honest, that was a problem I did have with the Five Doctors, that Barusa was the villain. So this does give him a redemption. It also neatly ties him into Engines of War, where he's being used for Rassilon's scheme in that book. But other than that, this is all stuff that didn't really need to be in this book. It's kind of just self-indulgent because Trial of a Time Lord did stuff. So now Terrance Dicks is trying to make that work a bit more. In fact, this all goes on so long, the Seventh Doctor only gets one chapter, as he goes off to Metebelis 3 to have a holiday, and the Eighth Doctor comes and saves him from being eaten by a giant spider by using the Master's tissue compressor, whilst the Master goes off to this other planet where he's able to take this worm thing, which is able to take his soul and spirit and stuff and turn it into a snake, so that when he dies, he can then go and take another person's body. That's how he explained the snake sting from the TV movie, and he goes off to deliberately get himself executed by the Daleks, although they're not named the Daleks in the book, which is a massive shame, because we know it's the Daleks from the TV movie and from the way they're described at the end of the chapter in this book where the Master goes to get himself killed. We know it's the Daleks. I don't know if it was a legal thing or a copyright thing, but it's a shame that they weren't directly mentioned to be Daleks. Just implied, making them the Blofeld or Furies only of this book. The final chapter, as mentioned, sees the Eighth Doctor go back, pick up Sam, and he allows her to travel through time and space, whilst there is an epilogue where Flavia's like, yeah, everything's fine now, don't worry about or whatever the Doctor was doing, it's all fine. And there's an appendix discussing Barusa's return, etc. at the very end. And that's basically the Eight Doctors. It's a pretty fun book. There's some good stuff, but I think there's a little bit of self-indulgence on Terrance Dicks' part, mainly for the stories he wrote or had contribution for, as well as also trying to tie up some bits fans wouldn't have liked from the TV movie and the Trial of the Time Lords. In fact, the prologue even claims that the Doctor was joking about being half human. That's Terrance Dicks' answer to resolving the whole Doctor being half human bit. Doesn't explain the eye being human, though, does it, Terrance? But when this is not focused on the Eighth Doctor meeting his other selves, the book is either more focused on telling epilogues to some other stories or focused on Time Lord stuff and Gallifreyan politics stuff. And halfway through the post-Trial of Time Lord stuff, it started to get a bit saggy, and it felt like this could have been a story all in itself, and it was just shoved into this multi-Doctor adventure instead of the Eighth Doctor just bumping into the Sixth Doctor during an adventure, and they get their memories back, and maybe the Eighth Doctor helps the Sixth Doctor out. And like I said, I think the stuff with the gangs in London 1997 went on a bit too long at the start. I think it could have been a little bit shortened down, maybe to just one chapter, and then the Eighth Doctor goes back to pick up Sam, maybe save her again at the end. That might have been better, but it's just a bit of a diversion before we even get started. Nevertheless, it's still a really great story, seeing the Eighth Doctor goes and meets his other incarnations, sometimes during their adventures, sometimes following some adventures, And with the Seventh Doctor case, it's a brand new adventure altogether. It's some pretty good stuff, some pretty fun stuff, but I do think some of it could have been cut out or cut down, and maybe some other bits could have been saved for a future story later down the line, like the whole Time Lord stuff halfway through the Sixth Doctor, Eighth Doctor stuff could have been calmed down a little bit. But it's still a pretty fun and enjoyable story, and definitely a good read, especially if you want to get into these books, or if you just want to check out another multi-Doctor story. This is one of the earlier multi-Doctor stories, and it's the fourth multi-Doctor story to be The Something Doctors, following the 3, the 5, and the 2 Doctors. And of course, we've got the 4 Doctors. One's an audio, one's a comic. So we'll see about any future The Something Doctors. There's some fan audios and fan films out there that are the 10 or the 11 Doctors. So overall, I will be giving the 8 Doctors an appropriate score of 8 out of 10. It's a pretty great story, but there are a few meanders and a few distractions and diversions from the main plot. Some of them just before we start, or just as we're coming towards the end. And they could have been cut down or cut out. But the majority of this story is a very interesting story, and some pretty great stuff happens. So that's it from my review of the 8 Doctors. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed McGann Month. I shall see you guys next time. Goodbye.